So I want to talk a little bit about IP markets today, and probably a better way to put it is the lack thereof, and why the lack thereof, pretty much. So let me make some contextual argument or points about our industry as I see it. And the conclusion I'll give you right up front is the status of our industry is not that good. There exists, in my view, a crisis of confidence in our industry and about our industry. Society in general does not trust what we do. Licensing is seen as opaque, secretive, lacking in ethical standards, even parasitical. And to complete my Debbie Downer analysis here, hopelessly litigious, riddled with trolls and extortionists, out to make a quick buck no matter the cost to small businesses or society. Patents are widely viewed as being of poor quality, even a sham product along the same lines as, subprime mortgages. With a 50-50 litigation success or survival rate, why aren't the cynics correct, if you think about it? So my point is, I got into this industry about 25 years ago, and I can tell you that a lot have changed. When I got into this business, patent monetization was regarded as a corporate best practice, believe it or not, with lots of kudos we got for taking IBM's IP revenues up to about $2 billion a year. By the way, it cost us about $36 million to bring that in. So that's a pretty good margin. And people thought that was pretty good. Nowadays, not so much. Global brands with reputations to protect don't like to talk about monetization. And no one really wants to be branded a troll or invited to discuss such activities with various regulators and policymakers. This is really a poor place for a 220-year-old industry created by our founding fathers. It is fair to say that anti-IBM or IP sentiment, maybe IBM sentiment, anti-IP sentiment is at its high water mark for at least 150 years. So how did we get here? Well, I got a few reasons here that I will be happy to share. Many in academia and technology, for that matter, grew up of age amidst the open source ethos. Quote, information just wants to be free, unquote. Well, in such a world, IP systems are inherently bad, if not evil. And even today, there are some companies, large companies, who should know better, who run around, especially in Washington, and say that. Politicians and most people do not even remember the competitive debates of the 80s and 90s, which was the last time we really had a national discussion about the importance of strong IP systems to our competitiveness and growth as a country. So it is in this context we convene and discuss the prospects of and for open and transparent marketplaces for IP. Now I'll just posit that there is a need for such a thing. If you just looked at the need and the prospects for monetization of the large portfolios of global, especially Asian companies and brands, you can see it. There are a lot of reasons for this. They have not done well at this because of cultural, political, even interpersonal issues, or even the lack of the necessary tools and skills, contacts, or a singular focus in-house on IP. Western companies, most of them, are in the same boat. This creates an opportunity, in my view, for an entity such as, I'll just pick one, IPXI right here in Chicago. Disclaimer, I'm on the board, but that doesn't exclude anything. Malachowski is too, so if you have a fight to pick it with him, because I'm going to be going back to another board meeting. This is an open market, transparent, based exchange to buy and sell IP, putting sellers and buyers together electronically, so you'll see it all on a screen. Can it do the trick? The answer right now is who knows. Few, I think, may be far-sighted enough, perhaps even daring enough to try such a thing. And certainly our industrial age accounting system, just to pick another issue, does not help. If you think about this, 20 years ago when I got into this, most accountants would put property, plant, and equipment on your balance sheet at about 80% of your corporate value, and 20% was everything else. Today, that's completely reversed. 80% is in intangibles, and 20% is everything else. Well, has our accounting system changed to recognize that? Not in the slightest. By the way, if you ask them why, and I did, I went down to Norwalk, which is kind of the next town over from where I live, and asked the FASB people, why in the world aren't you updating the accounting system? Why to deal with this post-industrial age we're talking about? The answer is they're scared to death of valuation lawsuits. And they will spend the rest of their time in the Eastern District of Texas trying to defend a judgment that somebody made. And you all know in this industry you can make all kinds of judgments, if you will. So I think, however, the accounting system just feeds the opacity that is already we're accused of in this industry. And that has two effects. One is an investor who wants to invest in a company that's 80% of its value is intellectual property. What do they have to do? They have to find surrogates somewhere that will say what they've got in the way of intellectual property. Well, what's a surrogate? Well, you can look at R&D budgets. Oh, well, how far does that get you? R&D is basically 90% D and 10% R in most companies, and it's the 10% that generates the intellectual property. So it's a real problem on the opacity front for potential investors. What else happens because of this accounting system? It leads to undermanagement of these assets in most corporations. Big time undermanagement. It's just my own view of this is all of this is pretty much my impression. But if you asked a CEO of a company 10 years ago if they had an IP strategy for their company, you would have been greeted in most cases with a blank stare. What in the hell is that idiot talking about? Now, if you do it today, the good news is they'll all say, oh, yeah, I got a strategy. We do. We covered it in our board and whatever. Oh, really? What is it? Well, you have to go ask the legal department. Now, I'm not against lawyers. I are one. But they aren't necessarily the most imaginative group in any corporation. What is their job? Their job is to erect a Maginot Line to protect the company. It's the rare company that brings that out of the shadows and actually does make it part of the strategy that management will endorse. So instead, we have this undermanaged phenomena, which is I started with Asian companies, but I could take this almost anywhere else you want in the world. Now, there are things that can certainly help. So I'm going to give you some. First, we need a relentless focus on patent quality. We need to worry less about the provenance of IP, and that can only help markets. That's why some companies like Article 1 you saw are trying to expand prior art searches beyond the traditional databases that everybody uses to include major languages. In the case of Article 1, we do it in 11 languages. Multiple countries. In the case of Article 1, we do it in 177 countries. And certainly, not last or least, non-patent literature. Non-patent literature doesn't pop out of the databases. Some companies have their own databases of their own literature. IBM did for its research publications. But if you think about it, what are the odds of uncovering a Korean PhD thesis that was written 20 years ago that might be relevant to a patent that you're trying to get or somebody's attacking you with or whatever it is? You're not going to find it. And that's turned out to be a huge issue for the world and for Article 1. And right now we're up to about 33,000 researchers around the world who do this kind of work. And what happens, they self-select. You put something out there, we're interested in this, and some number will read that and say, I know something about that, and you'll get all this kind of stuff back from them. But that's what that does. Now, the obvious disclaimer here is I'm the CEO of that thing right now. Another thing I think we need to do, and I saw my friend and former colleague Dave Kapos back there, is we need to fix once and for all Congress's recapture of fees that are supposed to go to the PTO, which basically deprives the PTO of air and oxygen. If you think about the irritation that this should cause everybody in this room, the PTO is funded in a fee-based system, which means we all pay for it. And yet Congress sits over there and says, I think I'll use that money for something else, whatever they feel like at that time. And that's just really quite wrong, frankly. I think we need to fix this accounting problem that I mentioned. And finally, I think we all have to change ourselves. Dan McCurdy and I were talking earlier about the way this industry treats itself, and it's not very good. It's not very good. We take great delight in demeaning the efforts of other companies in this largely cottage industry. So we need to change the word associations. My view, patents and IP have to again become allied with the words like invention and innovation instead of just litigation. We have to have a robust market in IP of any kind. The litigation or bust model, John Ellen falls around here somewhere, that's his quote, has got to be usurped. Now, the potential market is huge. So this is really in all our interests to do this. Couple of facts. U.S. business alone has spent $5 trillion in R&D over the past 20 years, resulting in about, 2.3 million active patents, some number like that. Only a tiny fraction have ever generated the first dollar of revenue or been put to use in a new product or service. Is there a market need there? Well, I would say, yeah, there certainly is. So that's the challenge and that's the opportunity for all of us in this room. And I'm going to stop there and do Q's and A's for a few minutes here and see if any of this makes sense, and we'll go from there.